Welcome, Bridge Builders, to another episode of the podcast. Got Mitch, Juliet, and Ashton here, your co-hosts for the Latter-day Bridge Builders podcast. Today we are doing another of our Tackling Cliches series. This is something that I started with my other co-host, Garrett, several years ago. And we just kind of, what are some of the common phrases that exist among us? And are they true? Is there some truth to them? Are they completely false? And so forth. So today we've got a fun one, and it's the old adage that when someone says they left the church, usually a member will say, well, you just left because you wanted to party, or you wanted to sin, or you wanted to do whatever. And we polled our audience members on Instagram, and we've got some responses that we'll be reading and just kind of having a bit of a chat about that. So remember to like and subscribe, share with your friends and family, and follow us on our social medias and so forth. So Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I guess thanks. You should be saying to us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Welcome to the podcast, Mitch.
Cool. All right. So let's kind of first off start with when people say this, I think there's an idea of what the sin is, because what types of sin are people thinking about when they're saying this kind of phrase?
Well, I think usually it is ones that are culturally visible. And so and this is talking about, culturally visible. So is that person going to a bar? Is that person drinking coffee? Are they drinking alcohol? Are they living with their...
My coffee cup here.
Are they living with their boyfriend? Are they wearing immodest clothing? Do they have tattoos? Do they have piercings? It seems like when this comes up, we're usually talking about things, that are seen. It's not like they left the church because they wanted to be dishonest with their fellow man.
Yeah.
It's usually not that. It's usually things that are, and I think some of the things I mentioned, some people in the church would consider more of a sin than others, I think a lot of people would sort of shrug their shoulders at wearing a tank top. But the law of chastity is real. It's a thing. It's really important. So it's not to say it's not real sin, but they tends to be the kinds of sins or activities that are somewhat visible and kind of serve as cultural markers, signs of being in, maybe. Yeah. I think one thing that kind of got me thinking about this is that, as someone who's left the church, we sort of scoff at this as being oh, that's so dumb. Why do they think that we are so simple-minded or so faithless or whatever, when most of us who have left have had a pretty rough road and have done a lot of soul searching, and we're really, really trying, and felt we try to do so much right, and so it can feel a little bit of a slap in the face for someone to think oh, they just wanted to be bad. But when people leave, they do tend to start doing the things, right? Tattoo. His is covered. Just kidding. Yeah. People, coffee right here in front of our face.
Yeah.
I won't expose what we do on the weekends necessarily, but people, there's swinging is a big thing in ex-Mormon land. Not that everyone is doing that, but it's a thing. Or people, who have been in heterosexual marriages coming out as being queer and kind of wanting to really expand the way that they experience sexuality. And so I think that if you are an active member and you see so many of the people that personally leave, end up drinking, getting tattoos, living with their boyfriends, whatever, I don't think that it's an enormous logical leap to say, oh, like they wanted to do things, like they wanted to do these things in their life, to have this, and that this is why they left. When like, yeah, I mean, there's like stereotypes about this, and most of them are, you know, it's like you have to get like your ex-Mormon tattoo, you know, or you have like your first ex-Mormon drink, or like your first like ex-Mormon like dating encounter, right? Like if people are seeing ex-Mormons do these things that they see as sins, it makes sense to have like a belief that is why they were leaving, if people are doing that once they have left.
Yeah.
So I think that that's just something to acknowledge, that I don't like. I think it's an understandable thing.
If I could put it in
believe.
these words, and maybe you can let me know if that kind of fits what you're saying. It almost seems like there's the LDS culture with the standards that come along with it. There's also a post-Mormon or ex-Mormon culture
100%.
and the standards that come along with it.
100%.
Yep.
Standards within the LDS culture of things not to do usually, often things to do, obviously. And then within the ex-Mormon culture, standards to do certain things that were in direct response to the culture of the LDS.
Yeah.
Standards. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there's a whole range of how people behave once they leave the church, but I think often people sort of get picked up, you know, into a group of people perhaps that have also left, where there's like a little bit of novelty to the fact that, you know, you used to all not drink, and now you can, you know, and so it kind of, I don't know, makes it a little
camaraderie,
extra fun.
together.
Yeah, because of that shared, it's coming together. Because of the shared experience, right? Of like the shared experience that you had in, and then the shared experience out. I had someone ask me, I remember on Instagram, like if I had any mission companions come to my wedding, which I did not. But I remember thinking no, but there were a lot of drunk returned missionaries. And yeah, so I think that like kind of moving through it together, and just sort of that sharp experience of like, this is something that we were all so opposed to together, and now this is something that we're all comfortable with, and that we are even finding connection and meaning with. Yeah, I kind of can scooch people together in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can speak of my own experience, the temptations and sin was never a reason for me to leave the church. But once I lost belief, it really like flipped a switch in my head. It's like, okay, now why, like, what is the purpose of me maybe like abstaining from alcohol or smoking or law of chastity, whatever, like fill in the blank. And I really just kind of like, you know, like looked within myself, like what was the reason I didn't drink coffee before? And it was like, as far as coffee goes, like I'm already drinking caffeine. It's just a different form. So for me, it was like, that was a quick, like, there's less sugar in it. There's like, it seems healthier for me to drink coffee than like an energy drink or so forth. And so for that one, that was kind of like a quick switch. And one of the first things that I partook of after losing my belief. Other things like alcohol, I still kind of like tried it within a few months after losing my faith. But again, it was just more of like a, what is the reason why kind of thing. And for alcohol specifically, it was a little bit more of like, well, this does have more effects than coffee does.
There's
negative
risk.
Effects, right?
Yeah.
There's risk with the psycho, whatever happens, you know, like changes your brain for a little bit. Like the effects on your liver, the effects like to your overall health and so forth. So that one I was a little bit more hesitant with, and still to this day, like maybe once every other week or so, you know, it's not very often. But, and then like smoking, I still have never smoked, you know. So everything for me, at least personally, was just like, and also like law chastity is like, oh, well, like now I can cheat or whatever. And like, I won't be judged by God. It's like, I mean, there's so many other reasons why you would want to stay faithful to your partner, you know, like it's not like, anyway.
Like it's, yeah.
Yeah. So on an individual case by case basis, I just kind of like looked at each sin and just kind of said, is this something that like I want to try? Something that like, what are the risks and benefits and so forth? And yeah, so it was never a reason to leave, but it was like after I left, all of a sudden, like, why, I guess is the big question. Like, why should I refrain from partaking in certain things?
Yeah.
So
I had this experience over and over with sin, I guess.
We're doing air quotes for those who aren't watching
Yeah.
us on a lot of these.
I'm thinking of when I got my nose pierced. And I had wanted to get my nose pierced for a long time. And if you're thinking your nose doesn't look pierced, it's not anymore. It's a whole thing. COVID messed it up. But I really wanted to get my nose pierced. And I was like, really, the teachings of the church did not make sense to me as far as like having only like one pair of like piercings in your earlobes. Because I'm like, if God's okay with like me having holes here, why can't I just like have like a little one here? And like, I work at a hospital and I saw so many doctors that had piercings and had tattoos. And I was like, I just don't buy that. Like, it doesn't look, it looks fine, right? Mm-hmm. Like these women all look completely normal and professional, and it seems fine. And also like the whole, like just like your single lobe piercings, I realized was like pretty like Eurocentric, you know, as far as, you know, guidance, like, interesting that like God is okay with the kind of body modification that happens to be American. Right.
Yeah.
And so it really felt like it should be fine for me to get my nose pierced, but it was like against the rules, and I was a rule follower, you know, and I didn't want to be rebellious. And that was scary because that's like putting sin right in the middle of your face. For everyone that would ever look at you would know that you were evil. Like, so it was stressful, but I ended up, you know, kind of just telling myself I can take it out, right? Like it's not permanent. I don't have to wear the jewelry there. And so I went and I got it pierced, and I looked in the mirror and I immediately had the feeling of, oh my gosh, this is so not a big deal. This is so inconsequential to not only everyone else's life, but my own life, that why did I spend so much time worrying about this like little hole in this little piece of metal that is so inconsequential? And I had that with sins, I guess. Like I had that experience over and over and over as I guess dabbled in things, which makes it sound like I've done a lot of drugs, which is the exact opposite of the case. Never done a drug that wasn't prescribed. I had the experience over and over of, oh, like this was a way bigger deal in my own head than it is anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts so far, Ashton? As he's the good one.
Well, I'm channeling my inner childhood judgment.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm just thinking that
judgy toddler Ashton has entered the chat.
The nose piercing was the gateway.
It was the gateway
to the slippery slope.
Yep.
No, for me, well, and the ironic thing to me at this point, and I'm going to come back around to this, it's not a problem anymore as far as like letter of the law standards, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so did it matter then? Because it was officially or formally like part of the standards in for the strength of youth, and it's not a big deal now? Or is that the test? I've heard it put that way, that it's like, well, it's the test that now that the standards aren't there, are we going to rebel against the standards that don't exist anymore? That's not rebellion anymore. You know, it gets messy. I wanted to ask the question, a rhetorical question, maybe that all of our listeners can just think about individually, because that's ultimately what matters the most, is what we individually believe, I think. What is sin. Each of you would put it in air quotes. Why? Because it's kind of unclear, you know. I'm at a point in my life where I think so much of what we call sin is arbitrary and very subjective. Just like I had mentioned with piercings, that was in for the strength of youth to not get piercings, and now it's not in there. It's changeable, so they're arbitrary, right? And for some, it's still subjective because they still hold that as the standard because it was so important that it doesn't make sense that it wouldn't still be important, right? You'd mentioned coffee and energy drinks, Mitch. And for me, even back like growing up, and again, my childhood inner judge, I'd look at other people who drank energy drinks because it wasn't against the letter of the law. And I would think, man, they are sinning. That's problematic. No coffee or energy drinks, even though the word of wisdom says our interpretation is hot drinks.
Even though the word of wisdom says neither of those.
We could get into that for sure as far as the original intent and whatnot being different than our cultural standards as they've evolved over time. So to me, at this point, in a black and white, like rules for a child, I think there's some value in and practical structure in having black and white rules for a child. When we carry those rules into adulthood, though, it really can disrupt relationships that could be beneficial and healthy as we interact with life, you know, and other people who are also living life. So those are kind of my initial thoughts as far as sin generally, you know, and why do people leave the church if it's to sin? Well, one person's sin is another person's righteousness sometimes.
Friday afternoon. Yeah.
So it's more complex. That's the point.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I read something from the Gram?
Of course.
I think that this sums it up pretty well. From an active member, they say that about themselves. That's how they self-identify. From what I've seen and experienced, certain things are no longer seen as sin in people who have left. Classic ones like no garment wearing, drinking coffee or alcohol, not paying tithing no longer seem like a sin. I don't know any people who have left the church and commit like actual sins like murder or stealing or similar. Just alcohol, weed, coffee/tea, not wearing garments, wearing tattoos. It's more like LDS Utah bubble sins/taboos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of going off of what we talked about earlier, like there's these two cultures. There's the LDS culture, and then there's the Ex-Mormon culture. You know, a lot of my friends now have never been members of the church, but they grew up in Utah their whole lives, and they're just like, so why are Ex-Mormons always like doing like whatever, you know? And I'm like, that's a great question.
Trauma.
Yeah. But like, I guess there is kind of like this, and even me getting like my tattoo, I never wanted a tattoo when I was like in the church. After I left, I was kind of like, maybe, you know, but then like, what are the reasons again? Like so forth. And if I'm being honest, like one reason was just kind of like, what if I don't want to look as Mormon as I look?
Because you look hella Mormon.
I do look quite Mormon.
You're trying your best with like the beard and stuff.
Right.
But,
and I had long hair for a while. Now Ashton's rocking the great long hair. So, but so I guess, yeah, if I'm being honest, there was that kind of like reason in a way, but also not like the only reason.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But I like this comment that this active member said, because yeah, like actual sins like murder or stealing, like I would never. Just because I left the church doesn't mean I don't have morals anymore.
Yeah.
Just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean I don't have morals anymore. And I think that's a fallacy to think that way.
Yeah.
So.
And we kind of talked in our, I guess, a few episodes ago about whatever that episode was about, where we just talked about, I talked about like my moral compass, and how when I began to focus on just like not hurting people, I then sort of compared that to like the standards of the church, and how I had really focused on that as like what made me a good person. You know, it's like, do you like, you know, not going to the grocery store on Sunday, like that is what makes you, what I felt like genuinely made me obedient and good and in alignment with God. And so I think a lot of people have the experience of when they leave the church and those falls away, that a lot of those things fall away, they actually begin to feel a lot more connected and confident and authentic about their sense of like morality. And so I think a lot of people would say that they feel like they sin a lot less. And we know that, I'm going to say actual sin, like things that everyone basically would agree is wrong, like lying or stealing or abuse, that happens in the church. You know, I'm not here to assert that like it happens at a higher rate as it does elsewhere, but it happens. You know, people. It's not like like being active in the church actually keeps you from sinning in any capacity.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It does present a deterrent from being public about it. Like, I don't know if you've heard, this is a terrible joke, but here we go. Like, how do you keep a Mormon girl to, how do you get a Mormon girl to like keep her shirt on at a party?
Make sure there's another Mormon.
Make sure there's another Mormon girl there.
I've heard the same thing with like, how do you keep a Mormon from drinking all your beer? Make sure there's another Mormon there.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's also something, this came to mind. Something about the repentance process kind of, in a way, allows for someone who is believing to sin, but then get better. And again, I'm not like saying like this is rampant or like what everybody's doing or whatever, but like there is maybe something about like the idea of like, oh, I can be forgiven. I don't know if like
that you're saying causes
people to give themselves a little more allowance.
Maybe the allowance.
Maybe. I don't know.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair in my life.
Yeah.
Like my experience and how I've viewed. And I think there was like a level of this wouldn't be right to think about it that way because it's like intentionally sinning.
Yeah.
Right? Like I feel like I'd have to like think back at the settings and whatnot where some of these thoughts were given and received, that it's wrong to intentionally sin knowing that the atonement is there. It's like a mockery of the atonement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's a fair point, and that definitely I've experienced that, like in my personal self, as well as attitudes that I guess that I've assumed or picked up on observing other people.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like we're taught a lot that like sinning is sort of, I know there's a lot of paradox here going all the way back to Eve, but we're taught that sinning is sort of part of the program, right? Like, and I feel like that's often taught as a way to be comforting when people do sin, like God, like we're not perfect. It's a fallen world. God knew you would make mistakes. He provided this atonement for you. And it kind of gives this, and I feel like that's often applied to sins that people are repeating as a way of saying like, the atonement is infinite. You can always go to God. You can always get like as much help as you need. And I do agree with you that it is also taught that you shouldn't sin with the like, oh, I can always repent later attitude. But I do think it
allows for it at least.
Yeah. And I feel like it kind of encourage me. There's just a little bit of an immaturity to it maybe. Whereas I feel like when that goes away, like where you are just responsible for your own moral choices and that you are the only one that's going to be accountable for them and the one that is going to be making restitution, that there's a little bit more of like, no, you need to decide now, like, is this something that you are going to be willing to deal with the consequences of, or is this something that you don't want to, and you don't want to be responsible for this, and you don't want to be this kind of person, and so you're just not going to do it. You know, like I feel like there's a little, I don't know. Tell me if you guys think I'm wrong about this, because I'm obviously, these thoughts are like barely being formed in my brain and then coming right out of my mouth. Like just a little bit more like adult accountability for decisions.
Well, we've heard the phrase, the enabling power of the atonement, right? And when we think about that, to clarify,
Jesus, the great enabler.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's the meaning of that, the intent of that phrase is that it enables us to do things that we're unable to do ourselves.
It's empowering.
It's empowering. Yeah. That I think is the intent of this enabling power of the atonement. While at the same time, I think the enabling power in the negative term of enabling bad behavior, that also comes like I think this is kind of getting to the heart of what we're all feeling here as far as our experiences in the church, that it allows for that enabling of sin because Jesus covers for those things.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, the buck stops at me because I'm an agent, I have free will, and I want to be accountable, and therefore I act differently because I will be accountable. I will hold myself accountable even. I was just reading, it's by Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of Women's Rights. And she said something that is, I think it's something along these lines. Liberty is a prerequisite to virtue. If we're only living virtuously because we're going to be punished, or because it's a rule, eternally punished, or it's a rule in our family of origin that will be punished if we don't follow that rule, that's not virtue. That's obedience alone, you know. Mm-hmm. But when it becomes into this, I am taking personal accountability for myself and my actions now, as well as in eternity, for those that believe in eternity and that our actions now affect our eternity, I will take accountability for my actions. That's when we become actually liberated, and not, what's the rule? What do I need to follow? Oh, I better do this because if I don't, I'm going to be punished. Versus, what is this building? If I'm kind to a person, is it because I want to encourage them to be the best version of themselves that they can be, or to maybe get some heavenly brownie points, you know? And it's just a different approach to how we engage in life with ourselves and with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's coming to my mind is like, once I shifted this, like what's the authority? Who is the authority on this topic, right? From kind of this, from God or like my priesthood leader or whatever to myself, it was so much more like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is when I did have a little bit more of like a view of God said I shouldn't do this, and then all of a sudden maybe I did do that thing, I felt a lot of shame with that and did not feel good. Okay, so once I shifted this like authority, like instead of from God, and maybe if I went against what God said and feeling like down on myself and bad about that, instead to like, what do I feel is right, and what are the physical consequences in this life, you know, rather than this future potentially, something just kind of shifted, and like it was so much easier for me to keep certain rules, I guess, in that, or keep certain commandments and so forth. Another kind of thought I had as you were talking, Ashton, is like you were saying, or I guess this whole kind of thought of like this, where, or this maturity that we kind of reach. I guess maybe kind of a flip side of this topic of like sin and so forth is sometimes former members of the church, never members of the church will kind of say like, oh, you're Mormon, you can't do whatever. And then sometimes I see people respond with like, it's not that I can't, like, yes, it is a rule, but like I choose not to, you know? And maybe some immaturity on my part is like, are you sure? You know, like, are you sure you're actually choosing for sure?
Under duress?
Yeah, but like, I don't know, just even in this conversation, kind of having a mind shift with that is like, no, they could be actually choosing that, you know? And who am I to judge that just because they're following the church's rules on something doesn't mean that they're actually like being conscientious about that as well, you know? So just...
And I think that maturity can come as an active member of the church.
Yeah, I agree.
I think at the same time, though, it's hard to find that maturity because the obedience part is so emphasized and fixated on that we neglect that mature view of it.
Yeah. It's hard to feel like you can be mature and also be good at the same time because, obey. And we're taught that obedience is a virtue in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which can be confusing when the people or the forces that you're supposed to obey sometimes aren't even like in alignment. It can,
I want to share something that really just struck me when I first had the thought, and then actually an evolution of thought after this thought. So the phrase in the church is obedience is the first law of heaven, right? I was struck at one point, I don't know if it was in the temple or reading in Genesis or Moses or whatever, but it was like with the war in heaven, theologically, I almost feel like it's more accurate to say that obedience was the first law of Lucifer. Like that was Lucifer's intent, was to control people's choices, to demand obedience, right? And that was like kind of shocking to me when I first thought about this. And I think there is some level of truth there, or we, out of our zealousness to keep the laws of God, right? Keep the laws of heaven, we hyper focus on obedience, and we don't realize how closely connected that is to, again, this theological intent behind Lucifer. I was at Sunstone last year and ran into a fundamentalist, and after one of the sessions, and I kind of shared this thought with him, and he's like, yeah, that's really interesting. The way that I look at it, another way to look at it is obedience is the first law, not meaning that it's the highest priority, but that it's the beginning. It's like as a child, obedience is very important, but we need to grow beyond obedience. It's the first step, but then we need to take the next steps, which maybe go into like this more mature mindset that we've been talking about. And that's really stuck with me a lot too, because I don't want to say that obedience is not important with certain settings, especially as a dependent child. But as parents, we don't want to create eternal dependency. We want to prepare and empower children to become mature adults that can think independently and make decisions autonomously, not have to be calling home constantly. Is this okay if I do this, Mom, Dad? You know, that kind of eternal infantilization.
Mm-hmm. Kind of along with that, I think there's something that's so tempting about forbidden fruit, when something like, no matter what, do not do X, whatever, drink X. Like, I think it's just kind of human nature to be like so curious about that. And I don't know, I recognize this as like just raising kids and so forth, that for young children, there does need to kind of be this like hard and fast, like I'm drinking coffee. My son's like, chocolate milk, like, like, I'm like, no, you're not having this, kind of thing. But to just kind of like lay down the law and say like, no matter what, like you cannot like partake of it, like whatever. Something about that rebellious spirit in us just like wants to, like, so bad, whereas just in experiences of myself, just kind of experiencing these things, and like, instead of no matter what, no, it's like, well, why? Right. And the why behind it for me is like everything. And so for a lot of stuff, even as a member of the church, like not knowing the why just kind of like bugged me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's all, you're supposed to be trusting that God knows best.
And, on my mission, there would often be like people, as we're teaching people the word of wisdom, like, hey, like, sorry, no coffee, no tea. Which actually in Portuguese, no black tea specifically. Green tea, never mentioned.
That's
so
interesting.
My mission president actually gave me green tea on my mission. Kind of interesting. But
that was the beginning of your downfall.
That was the slippery slope. Thank you, President. Some missionaries would kind of, I never bought into it. Like, I was like, I can't teach that, but I let it happen with my companions. They said, like, if the prophet tomorrow said we can't drink milk, we would follow that. And I was like, I don't like that. Why? And if we're going back to this, obedience is the first law of heaven. I really like what you said, like maybe it's the first step that needs to be understood. And it kind of like, you need to know the rules before you break them. It's kind of like in the same vein, I think. So I don't know. Yeah. Something about like if the prophet said no milk, no carrots tomorrow.
No carrots.
Like we would follow that. And I'm like, I don't love that idea. But.
Which I think, like some of our rules, like that sounds, that feels silly to us, like the idea of no milk, no carrots. But that is how some of the rules sound to like other people. Like the no coffee thing, like it sounds just as wackadoodle.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for some reason, it makes so much, it feels like it makes sense to us, because it's what we subscribe to for years and years. Yeah. Is it okay if I read another? This is a little lengthy, but I thought it was really valuable from Instagram about sin. It has like a little bit of a different perspective. This is an active member, I believe. She says, I truly don't believe people leave the church because they want to sin. Quotes, her quotes. But I do believe that for some people, removing the element of shame and guilt attached to their actions is a piece of why they leave. For my brothers, for instance, they all struggled with pornography and huge feelings of shame, to the point of believing they were going to hell, and for some of them becoming suicidal. Removing the idea of that struggle being a sin allowed them to live, and I've always told them I'd much rather have them be alive than be a member of the church, so I'm glad they left. This wasn't the primary reason, and I really respect that they have issues with the doctrine and policies and all of that. But I do think that this piece of it is part of what pushed them there. It's not the same for everyone, but I think there are definitely people who just need to remove the pressure of living a certain way. So I would never say anyone left the church because they wanted to sin, because I think that's not giving people any credit. But I do think that there's a relief when those beliefs fall away and you don't have to feel bad about certain choices anymore. And for the record, this is parenthetically, and for the record, I have never believed my brothers were going to hell, and I make sure they know that. I see why they felt that way, but it breaks my heart that was their understanding of the gospel, because it's not consistent with what I've learned at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This thought has come back to my mind 3 or 4 times as we've been talking. I've been listening to Jennifer Finlayson Fife, if you're familiar with her, for the
Queen. She's a queen.
She is a queen.
She's a LDS sex therapist.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say for the audience. Highly recommend her perspective. She said something that, again, like these things that just stick in my head, but she said, repression drives obsession. And when it comes to pornography and the sexual sins, like it first came up when we were talking about why do people leave, what's the stereotype of why people leave and they want to sin. Sexual sin was one of the first that came to my mind as far as the judgment that I've placed on other people as they've left. But when it comes to this repression, it's because it's not just I think it's good advice to say, don't have sexual relations with people outside of marriage. I think that can be a positive thing because if it's irresponsible, it can complicate things a lot and cause maybe more hurt than other of these stereotypical sins that we've talked about. I lost my train of thought a little bit, but going back to the repression drives obsession, that when it comes to someone that has to follow the rule about sexuality and the law of chastity within the church, that has repressed not just the action, but even the acknowledgement that it's a part of us. Because I think being deliberate about our actions is a really good thing when it comes to sexuality. But whether it's culturally or doctrinally, and I think there are definite elements of both, it's almost like a rejection of a part of ourselves. And having that repression and repressing actions for so long, once that law of chastity is no longer believed or the expectation anymore, what has happened is those individuals have almost been manufactured into obsessive over that because of that repression and that rejection of self, which if we're to love God first with all our heart, might, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves, like we need to love ourselves. But if we have rejected such a big part of ourselves, or such an essential part of ourselves, I'll say that, then I mean that repression is major, and it drives that obsession that, again, when those parameters have kind of been lifted, it becomes maybe more visible to other people.
Maybe even before the parameters are lifted, or, I think that, what did I hear one time? Like Draper, Utah is like the swinging capital of the world. And I think that's not necessarily just the Ex-Mormons over there,
and that pornography is viewed at a higher rate in Utah than other places in the nation where it's been statistically that information has been gathered.
I think also just like the Bible Belt in general, like pornography use is higher there. So there is something about repression that does drive obsession. So
that's for sure correlated.
Yes, at least yes, at the very least correlated.
Probably a connection to causation as well.
Yeah,
I think you bring up something. I mean, we could have, I think, a whole entire podcast releasing like multiple episodes every week, just talking about like the intersection of Mormonism and sexuality. It is never ending.
And people much more qualified than us
maybe
already are doing that. So maybe we're okay not, right?
But we are experts in our own experiences. Yes. And I think this is something where everybody, whether they are talking about it out loud or not, have big experiences in this realm, right? That influence how they're functioning and what they're experiencing in or out of the church. And I think one thing I just want to say is that, like, if you were a person who left the church because you were like tired of not being able to have sex openly and comfortably and like however you wanted to, like, I think that that's valid. You know, like, I think, I don't think that's the majority of people, but we're talking about this cliche of like, oh, they left because they wanted to sin, and sort of, we've kind of begun from a place of the assumption that that would be a wrong thing to do. And, you know, we've talked about the fact that what are we really calling sin, you know? But I think that if you are somebody who did leave the church because you want to do some of these things, like, if that's where it all began, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that that's something that needs to be justified to anybody. You know, I think, yeah, that's kind of what it, and I guess, well, that's all I'll say.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. I think
People are allowed to do that.
yes, people are allowed to do that for sure. And maybe one of the more visible ways that I see that these days is for those who are queer and gay and so forth.
Yeah.
Like there's,
Yeah.
you know, like that's
Understandable.
understandably like
Yeah.
a major reason why a lot of people leave the church is because they
Want what straight people are allowed to have.
right. And
Yeah.
there's essentially no room for that within the church,
Yeah.
unless it's within the parameters set, you know. And so I don't know, but there are some people that are making it work somehow, you know. Right now, on social media,
Charlie Bird.
Charlie Bird, yes. I was
There
like,
you go.
Charlie what? He's being very open and honest about like deciding to marry his husband Ryan.
Mhm. Thanks.
Yeah. And like the messages he's received from people, the thoughts he's like been going through with that and so forth. He's just been very open and vulnerable with it on his social media this week. And I think it's really cool to be able to empathize with that, I guess. And so, and then there's other people, like I've got a good friend who's in a mixed orientation marriage, and he's a member of the church and self-identifies as same-sex attracted, I guess, is what he uses, but married to a woman and has a couple kids. And so, I don't know, there's just so many different experiences, and everybody's path is individual. Like we said, we're all experts on our own journeys. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going now. I make an end of speaking.
You make an end of your speaking. It came to pass. It's
Yeah.
come to pass.
So bringing things back to just the overarching theme of why people, or could you restate it maybe?
Of
Do people leave the church to sin? Is it
yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
or why do people leave the church? Is it to sin? You don't have to leave the church to sin, according to our standards of what sins are, right? I think the most difficult thing that for me to observe and to try to give support where I can with people in their various faith journeys is it is a very hard thing to leave the church. Because you're leaving so many things, right? So many aspects of our communities, which also makes it really hard to come back to church as well, because then it's like whether the approach of like you have to eat crow or you have to be in the depths of humility before you're worthy to come back, right? The standard to come back into the church, I think, is higher than the standard to remain a member in good standing, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
And I feel like everybody is on their journey we don't have to police people whether they're on the right path of their journey. And we can maybe take the mentality as active members, we can take the mentality of we can leave their path, their choices up to them. It's between them and God. It's not between them and me and God, right? Like, we don't have the business to make those final judgments in someone's life, right? And maybe allowing someone, if they want to sin, whether they leave the church or not. I mean, that's not my business so much. But it is my business to be supportive of people if they want to be part of the community, and to engage in community building if we have crossover where both of us are interested in doing that, whatever the positioning is. I think for me, I'm not trying to tell people how they should approach these things. I'm trying to tell people how I am now approaching these things based on the pain that I caused and the pain that I received in how I used to engage regarding people, whether they leave or stay. And I think if we allow, we active people, if we allow people to go when they feel they need to, and even if they want to, and allow them to come back when they feel they need to or feel they want to. And again, allowing that free will and not that control over someone else's life that just we as humans, I think, naturally just cling on to because we feel like we know better for someone else than they know for themselves.
Yeah. So. Yeah, David Archuleta's book came out this week, so he's been kind of promoting that, and seeing a lot of comments from some people who are saying, like, we love you, David, like, you're a good guy, like, just know how much happier you would be if you, like, came back to church or, you know, lived a straight performing life or whatever. So I guess that's just kind of a, in my view, kind of childish way to look at it. And who, again, nature of the universe, is there God? I don't know. Like, I guess if there is, I will answer to that God one day about the things that I've done in my life. This little mocha over here that I drank this morning, and so forth. And if there is a consequence for that, I guess so be it. But I guess in my mind, that just seems like a very petty kind of deity, you know?
Yeah, me too.
Well, I don't know how we're doing on time.
I think we're coming about to there.
Okay.
If I could share just one final thing as far as the way that I interpret how Jesus approached these things. Because he was in a culture of very strict laws and dictations of what goes into the body, what's done with the body. Mm-hmm. And he said, just paraphrasing, I wish I had it ready to quote it. It's not what goes into the body that defiles a person. It's what comes out of, I think, what goes into the mouth. It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person. It's what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person. And I think if we, just humans in general, not even just religious and whatnot, but just humans in general, if we were more concerned about the treatment of other people instead of just the judgments on whether or not they do the same things that we do as far as our standards, and the competing standards versus just allowing ourselves to respect people where they're at and notice and recognize the life and the energy that they bring, even though they have different standards than me, you know?
Yeah.
So I encourage everyone to apply these teachings of Jesus. Just to be more worried about, again, how we treat each other than whether we live up to these strict laws that have been set and have changed and evolved over the course of thousands of years, and even year after year they evolve and change.
Yeah.
That's good. So should we take a vote on the cliche as, do people leave because they want to sin?
Yeah, sometimes they do. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
I think that's where I land too.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us this week on a Tackling Cliches series. Hopefully more of these to come. I like talking about these kind of topics. You can also go back a couple years ago where me and Garrett visited some of these things and listen to that. I think we might revisit some of those same topics in the future. So if you have an idea of a cliche that you want us to tackle, send it in an email to ldsbridgebuilders@gmail.com and we'll consider it for the podcast. So thanks, guys. Good episode today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Have a good one. See you next time.